Okay, so I'll start.
Yes.
Um, my name is Stephanie Izagiri. I am a immigration attorney based in Colorado Springs, and I am here today with my good friend Yesenia Beascochea, and together we're going to talk about the legal impact of how this new public charge rule is going to affect our community. Before we get started, I'm going to let Yesenia introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Yesenia Biascocha. Like Stephanie said, I work for Center for Health Progress, where we believe that healthcare access should be available for everyone in the state of Colorado. That is one of our vision, and we are so glad that we are partnering up with Stephanie to get clarification and information about public charge.
And before we get started, I'll just say that we did another video basically addressing the public charge rule from Yesenia's perspective, from the perspective of access to healthcare. And we're also planning on doing the same two videos in Spanish so that we can best inform our community from all perspectives of this change.
Yes. There is a couple of questions that have come up to us,
Okay.
and I want to make sure that we address them all. What is this whole new process, this new rule, these new changes that are happening to public charge?
So basically, the public charge rule has been in immigration law for a long time, but it was very rarely used. And this is part of the administration's efforts, I would say, to really restrict access to immigration benefits. But I think it's really important that people understand who it impacts and who it doesn't impact.
Okay.
So, first, it impacts people who are applying for adjustment of status, so not processing at the consulate. And it's primarily family based cases. So, applying for your spouse, applying for your parents, or maybe your children. But there's a whole bunch of cases that it doesn't apply to. So, it does not apply to what we call VAWA. Those are women who are I guess anyone who's a victim of domestic violence or abuse. It does not apply to the U visa, which is a visa for crime victims. It does not apply to the T visa, that's victims of trafficking. It also doesn't apply to Cubans adjusting status under the Cuban Adjustment Act. And it does not apply to what we call SIJS, which is Special Immigrant Juvenile Status. And then it doesn't apply to people further on in the immigration system or in the immigration process. So, for example, naturalization and what we call removal of conditions. So, it is a big change. It is, I think, a very understandably scary change, but it affects a really small amount of people.
Oh, okay. So then it's not everyone that is in the process of adjusting status. It's just a small group of people. And is this when does this new rule starts? When does this new rule begins?
So it starts February 24th. And one of the important things to understand is that it is going to essentially February 24th is day one. And we are not going to be looking at who received or who may have received benefits in the past. So prior to February 24th, we are only going to be looking at who might be receiving public benefits or who might be a public charge risk going forward.
Oh, great. And when we're talking about these new changes and this new group of people that might be impacted, how does this charge this new rule changes? How does because we had public charge before, but now how does this new rule come and impact the process?
So, in the kinds of cases that are affected, there's almost always two people. There is the petitioner, that's usually like the US citizen who's applying for their family member, and then there's the beneficiary. We also sometimes refer to those people as the sponsor, that would be the US citizen or lawful permanent resident, and then the applicant who's also the beneficiary. So in the past, we just looked at the financial situation of the petitioner. They were the only one that mattered, and we actually didn't collect any financial information about the immigrant.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're going to be looking at the household as a whole, and so we're going to have to get information from both parties.
Okay. And what are these new factors when you're talking about, or these new ways of figuring out who is impacted or not impacted, or who does this apply or doesn't apply under this new rule?
So, health insurance or health access to public benefits is probably the factor that's been talked about the most, but there's actually several others that apply. The age of the applicant, their family status, meaning who their household is made up of, assets, debts, kind of the financial status of the family, their education, or any kind of professional skills that they might have. And then we're still going to look at the income of the petitioner, the person who's applying for their family member. And so the idea is that these six factors are all going to be put in kind of a balance, and we don't know exactly how much weight each factor is going to receive, but we believe that they'll be looking for essentially positive factors and negative factors, and we want to make sure that the positive factors outweigh the negative factors.
Okay, I want to go a little bit into a lot of the language that attorneys use that sometimes
Sure.
sometimes can be scary for us who do not know that term's being used. When you're talking about factors, are you talking about? Can you give me some examples of, for example, family status or the number of people in your? Can you give me an example of that?
So when we say factors, those are essentially just sort of, maybe another way to say it is kind of facts, or like the way that your family is made up, or kind of like a look at the whole kind of person. And each one has its own set of requirements. So I actually have an 18-page form that the government is going to require us to submit. But the idea is to try to essentially provide kind of a whole picture of the immigrant's ability to be independent. And so, yes, we're going to look at age. We're going to look at essentially like who is in your family, how much do each of those people earn, and then I guess all the other kind of elements or facts of that person's financial situation.
Okay, so one negative. Can you tell me, for example, one negative factor of age?
Sure. So essentially, if you aren't able to be sufficient, that is considered a negative factor. And so, one of the things we're going to have to look at is older people who probably appropriately aren't working. I think it's above 60. Uh, maybe we have less of an expectation that they be working because of their age, but maybe younger people who aren't working, that could potentially be like a negative factor or could be held against them. Of course, no one expects children to be working, so people under 18, hopefully, that will not be held as a negative thing against them. But I guess one of the things that I really want to emphasize is that at this point, we have guidance related to this form, but we don't really know how all these factors are going to be kind of assembled and balanced. And so, one of the main points that I want to emphasize to people is that it is impossible for anyone to give a short answer like what happens if I want to apply for my mom and she's 65, or what happens if I have a family member who has a medical condition, or I have this kind of debt or this kind of education issue. That is not something that anyone can intelligently answer for you over the phone or in like a quick answer. We are planning on sitting down with our clients going forward and spending a pretty significant amount of time collecting this information and doing kind of an analysis to figure out if we think they'll qualify or not. So while I want people to have as much information as possible, I don't want anybody to get the idea that, oh, if you have this one thing or if you don't have this other thing, your case is either impossible to submit or it's definitely going to be approved. There's a lot of gray area still.
Let's go ahead and move along with you talked a little bit about it's impossible or not impossible to determine whether or not you should submit an application or not. How will the immigration officers decide to approve or deny a case? And is this like the whole, like they're going to decide a case based on public church?
So that is a good question. And at this point in time, we don't have any we don't have any specific guidance, and we also don't have any experience. So one of the ways that lawyers usually make the recommendations that they make to their clients is based on their experience and the experience of kind of those around them. So what we do know is that there are what the government is calling heavily weighted positive factors and heavily weighted negative factors. So, a heavily weighted negative factor is not having access to health insurance, essentially. So, the vast majority of the people that I work with, for example, don't qualify for Medicaid because they're not documented currently. And they're not going to qualify for Medicaid for the first 5 years that they have their green card. So that means that they're really limited to private health insurance plans that are out there. And so what we have seen so far is that having a private health insurance plan is considered a positive factor. If you can get one, you probably should. But again, that would be something to talk with, an attorney individually. And then we also know that having household income at the level 250% above the federal poverty line is also considered a positive factor. Now, of course, figuring out what the poverty line is in every family is an individual determination because you have to look at how many people are in the family, how much income is being earned. But those are the two positive and negative factors that we know about currently. The others have not been discussed as having any special weight.
Okay, great. I want to definitely invite the community if you have questions specifically about your case. Make sure and consult with an attorney. And don't make the assumption that your application should not be continue. You should not continue moving forward your application. That is really, personally, I would say that I've been in your case. I myself was undocumented at one point, so it is a huge risk and it is scary. It is really scary, but having the support of someone who can guide you through the process is definitely something that I recommend. And Center for Health Progress definitely believes that Medicaid and access to Medicaid and health insurance is going to be one of the things that people are going to be most impacted about. But we believe that with good information, clear information, we can go ahead and move forward. So thank you, Stephanie, and thank you to your law firm for making yourself available for us to get educated in the subject.
Thank you very much. And if you have any other questions, feel free to contact either one of us or a professional who works in this area. And I know we'd both be happy to help out any way we can.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes.